Chapter 16 of When Pollyanna Grows Up. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. Pollyanna Grows Up by Eleanor H. Porter. Chapter 16 When Pollyanna Was Expected. All Beldingsville was fairly aquiver with excitement. Not since Pollyanna Whittier came home from the sanatorium walking had there been such a chatter of talk over backyard fences and on every street corner. Today, too, the center of interest was Pollyanna. Once again Pollyanna was coming home. But so different a Pollyanna, and so different a homecoming. Pollyanna was 20 now. For 6 years she had spent her winters in Germany, her summers leisurely traveling with Dr. Chilton and his wife. Only once during that time had she been in Beldingsville, and then it was for but a short 4 weeks the summer she was 16. Now she was coming home to stay, report said, she and her Aunt Polly. The doctor would not be with them. 6 months before, the town had been shocked and saddened by the news that the doctor had died suddenly. Beldingsville had expected then that Mrs. Chilton and Pollyanna would return at once to the old home, but they had not come. Instead, had come word that the widow and her niece would remain abroad for a time. The report said that in entirely new surroundings Mrs. Chilton was trying to seek distraction and relief from her great sorrow. Very soon, however, vague rumors, and rumors not so vague, began to float about the town that, financially, all was not well with Mrs. Polly Chilton. Certain railroad stocks, in which it was known that the Harrington estate had been heavily interested, wavered uncertainly, then tumbled into ruin and disaster. Other investments, according to report, were in a most precarious condition. From the doctor's estate little could be expected. He had not been a rich man, and his expenses had been heavy for the past 6 years. Beldingsville was not surprised, therefore, when not quite 6 months after the doctor's death word came that Mrs. Chilton and Pollyanna were coming home. Once more the old Harrington homestead, so long closed and silent, showed up-flung windows and wide-open doors. Once more Nancy, now Mrs. Timothy Durgin, swept and scrubbed and dusted until the old place shone in spotless order. "No, I hain't had no instruction ter do it. I hain't," Nancy explained to curious friends and neighbors who halted at the gate or came more boldly up to the doorways. "Mother Durgin's had the key, course, and has come in regular to air up and see that things was all right. And Miss Chilton just wrote and said she and Miss Pollyanna was comin' this week Friday, and ter please see that the rooms and sheets was aired, and ter leave the key under the side door mat on that day." "Under the mat, indeed! Just as if I'd leave them 2 poor things ter come into this house alone, and all forlorn like that, and me only a mile away, a sittin' in my own parlor like as if I was a fine lady and hadn't no heart at all, at all. Just as if the poor things hadn't enough ter stand without that a comin' into this house, and the doctor gone, bless his kind heart, and never comin' back. And no money, too. Did ye hear about that? And ain't it a shame, a shame? Think of Miss Polly, I mean Miss Chilton, bein' poor. My stars and stockings, I can't sense it. I can't. Perhaps to no one did Nancy speak so interestedly as she did to a tall, good-looking young fellow with peculiarly frank eyes and a particularly winning smile, who cantered up to the side door on a mettlesome thoroughbred at 10 o'clock that Thursday morning. At the same time, to no one did she talk with so much evident embarrassment, so far as the manner of address was concerned, for her tongue stumbled and blundered out a "Master Jimmy, Mr. Bean, I mean Mr. Pendleton, Master Jimmy," with a nervous precipitation that sent the young man himself into a merry peal of laughter. "Never mind, Nancy, let it go at whatever comes handiest," he chuckled. "I've found out what I wanted to know. Mrs. Chilton and her niece really are expected tomorrow." "Yes, sir, they be, sir," courtesied Nancy. "More's the pity. Not but that I shall be glad enough ter see 'em, you understand, but it's the way they're a comin'." "Yes, I know. I understand," nodded the youth gravely, his eyes sweeping the fine old house before him. "Well, I suppose that part can't be helped, but I'm glad you're doing just what you're doing. That will help a whole lot," he finished, with a bright smile, as he wheeled about and rode rapidly down the driveway. Back on the steps, Nancy wagged her head wisely. "I ain't surprised, Master Jimmy," she declared aloud, her admiring eyes following the handsome figures of horse and man. "I ain't surprised that you ain't lettin' no grass grow under your feet 'bout inquirin' for Miss Pollyanna. I said long ago 'twould come some time, and it's bound to, what with your growin' so handsome and tall. And I hope 'twill. I do, I do. It'll be just like a book, what with her a findin' you and gettin' you into that grand home with Mr. Pendleton. My, but who'd ever take you now for that little Jimmy Bean that used to be? I never did see such a change in anybody, I didn't," she answered, with one last look at the rapidly disappearing figures far down the road. Something of the same thought must have been in the mind of John Pendleton some time later that same morning, for from the veranda of his big gray house on Pendleton Hill, John Pendleton was watching the rapid approach of that same horse and rider, and in his eyes was an expression very like the one that had been in Mrs. Nancy Durgin's. On his lips, too, was an admiring "Jove, what a handsome pair!" as the two dashed by on the way to the stable. 5 minutes later the youth came around the corner of the house and slowly ascended the veranda steps. "Well, my boy, is it true? Are they coming?" asked the man with visible eagerness. "Yes." "When?" "Tomorrow." The young fellow dropped himself into a chair. At the crisp terseness of the answer, John Pendleton frowned. He threw a quick look into the young man's face. For a moment he hesitated. Then, a little abruptly, he asked, "My son, what's the matter?" "Matter? Nothing, sir." "Nonsense! I know better. You left here an hour ago so eager to be off that wild horses could not have held you. Now you sit humped up in that chair and look as if wild horses couldn't drag you out of it. If I didn't know better, I'd think you weren't glad that our friends are coming." He paused, evidently for a reply, but he did not get it. "Why, Jim, aren't you glad they're coming?" The young fellow laughed and stirred restlessly. "Why, yes, of course." "Humph! You act like it." The youth laughed again. A boyish red flamed into his face. "Well, it's only that I was thinking of Pollyanna." "Pollyanna? Why, man alive, you've done nothing but prattle of Pollyanna ever since you came home from Boston and found she was expected. I thought you were dying to see Pollyanna." The other leaned forward with curious intentness. "That's exactly it. See? You said it a minute ago. It's just as if yesterday wild horses couldn't keep me from seeing Pollyanna, and now, today, when I know she's coming, they couldn't drag me to see her." "Why, Jim!" At the shocked incredulity on John Pendleton's face, the younger man fell back in his chair with an